Hello and welcome. What's it like living with the world's most wanted man? For most people, the name Osama bin Laden is associated with terror and a mission to bring down the West and its allies in the Middle East. It was 9/11 that brought the Al-Qaeda leader to the world's attention. Those coordinated attacks took the lives of more than 2,000 people and started a manhunt that led the US to invade Afghanistan. But in the 8 years since that fateful day, the world has heard little from bin Laden. His communications have been mostly in the form of grainy video messages or voice recordings that reveal little about his location, adding to his elusive nature. There are plenty of rumors of his whereabouts, his health, and whether or not he's even alive. Even today, after billions have been spent trying to apprehend him, little is known about Osama bin Laden. But that may be changing. For the first time, Najwa bin Laden, the first wife of the Al-Qaeda leader, and her fourth son, Omar, are speaking out in great detail about life with this infamous man. On today's show, we ask, what was life like with Osama bin Laden, and could those details lead to his capture? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. Joining me now from Atlanta is Jean Sasson, a New York Times best-selling author who, along with Najwa bin Laden and Omar bin Laden, is the co-author of Growing Up Bin Laden. Osama's wife and son take us inside their secret world. Ms. Sasson has authored several books, mostly focusing on the Middle East. Prior to her writing career, she lived in Saudi Arabia and has traveled extensively in the Middle East. I welcome you to the program, Jean.
Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Good to have you here. And I've got to start by asking, what are Najwa and Omar looking to get out of this book? Are they looking to clear their name, to perhaps disassociate themselves with the negative aspects of the bin Laden name?
Yes, I think that you've hit it on the head. What it is there were so many articles written about Omar, the son, and so much of it was false until he decided that he wanted to be the one to tell the world his story and for history to know exactly what it was like to live with Osama bin Laden through his wife and son.
Now, let me ask you, you were approached by Omar to write the book.
Yes.
Why did he pick you, and how did you react to that approach initially?
Well, when I first received a message from Omar, it was in the form of an email, and he said, "I'm the son of Osama bin Laden, and I would love for you to tell my story." Well, I thought it was a crank email, but there was a telephone number attached. I could see that it was from Egypt, so I picked up the phone and I dialed, and a very soft-spoken man answered, and over time I got to know Omar. At first, I did not think I'd be the correct person to help them to get this story to the world because I mainly write about women. But over time, his mother wrote to me telling me how wonderful her son was in an effort to try to convince me to do the story. And the reason they asked me is they had known and heard about Princess Sultana that I had written about, and they were told that I could be trusted to write their story in the way that they wanted it told, which is the truth of their life. So once Najwa said she was on board, which stunned me, to tell you the truth, I never dreamed that she would participate. Then the rest is history. Then we started with the interviewing and the questions and the translations because Najwa does not speak English or read or write English. And here is the book that's finally out after 18 months, and it was a lot of hard work. I believe it's worth it due to the revelations we now have.
Well, I'll get on to Najwa and some of those revelations in a moment, but let me ask you about Omar bin Laden in particular, because we saw some video of him there. You know, he has something of an eccentric image, you know, with the dreadlocks, and he's always in leather, and his British wife is in leather too. And I wonder to what degree, you know, he's been in the tabloids before. To what degree were you worried there may be just an element of trying to get fame here? Is he driven to get the kind of international attention or public attention?
I had a little concern in the beginning, but after getting to know Omar, we talked for a month or two before I decided that I would participate with the book. I came to know Omar bin Laden as one of the finest young men I've ever known. He has integrity, he's extremely honest, and I realized that he honestly did want to be the one to tell his story, that he was not looking for any undue attention. So he won me over, and if I were to say, I would like this certain person to be in my family, a nephew, I would say, you know, I'd like for Omar to be in my family. That's how much I've grown to care about this young man.
Now, interestingly enough, his lifestyle is very, very different from that obviously advocated by his father, and he was very much entrenched in that, as you write in the book, and then left. He managed to get out of that. Does he fear, from what you know, does he fear retribution for breaking away from his father's world?
Well, I asked him that question because I'm in America now, even though I travel back and forth to the Middle East. And I said, Omar, you and your mother need to think about this. Do you have any concern that someone would try to harm you physically? And he said, do you mean my father? And I said, yes. He said, never. He said, my father would never harm me or my mother, and I am not concerned. So, you know, I had to go with his feelings on the matter. He knew his father. Now, his father, as we know, was stern and difficult, but he said his father would never physically harm him or his mother.
What is the relationship that Najwa and Omar have with the rest of the large bin Laden clan?
Well, Omar has had a good relationship. He's been in Saudi Arabia. He's been with Osama's brothers. And Najwa, who does not live in Saudi Arabia, but also has contact. So I would say that they have a good relationship.
Even though they've spoken out and been fairly frank about the way life was?
Well, I don't believe that any person in Saudi Arabia, any Saudi Arabian, is ever happy about this kind of publicity. So I'm sure there have probably been conversations about that, but it does not seem to have destroyed their relationship.
Now, there's an email we got from a viewer by the name of Rizwan in Pakistan who wrote in, and you've answered the first part of this question, but he says, why did his wife and son open up now? Is there a reason they're both speaking up now? What's the reason for the timing?
I do believe that it was after, as you said, you saw yourself some of the information and the tabloid information. I do believe that Omar had been thinking about that, mulling over. I think he spoke with some people. They told him if he wanted to tell the truth of his life, that he should get a writer who would do that and work with him. And then somehow or another, he decided on me, and they were very determined that I was going to be the person who wrote their story. And it all, you know, worked out very well.
And of course, you explain in the book, you've been very clear where your comments are added. It's largely their story in their words. Reading what Najwa says about some of the things that happened, do you get a sense that perhaps there's an element of naivety, that she didn't really understand the world she was going into initially? Because some of the stories suggest that she was very much part of that system and really accepted it.
I find Najwa to be extremely sweet, and I think that she is a bit naive only because she has lived a life of isolation like so many women in Saudi Arabia. I'm not saying that's bad because it works for them in Saudi Arabia, but I am just saying that they don't really experience public life, and certainly not life in other countries outside of Saudi Arabia.
Now, I know she got married at 15, but
Yes.
she ended up having her two daughters married at just 12, and I gather Omar actually went out and picked out the husbands.
Yes, this was a very interesting story to me because Omar told me that his father asked him to look around, talk with the men, come to him and recommend which of the men that he believed, Omar believed, would be kindly and good husbands for his younger sisters. And Omar said he took it very seriously, and there was one young man named Muhammad from Saudi Arabia who married his full sister, and then there was another of the fighters who married his half-sister. And Omar did tell me that he was concerned and worried at the wedding that Fatma seemed quite young. And I asked Najwa what she felt, and she said, well, of course, any mother worries about her daughter, but she was close to me, and in my society, a young girl, a female needs a husband to take care of her.
It was interesting that Osama bin Laden eventually took on a number of wives, but he didn't. Initially, he didn't say anything to Najwa, but he then did ask her permission, didn't he?
Yes, before he ever took the second wife, he talked to her at great length, and this surprised me too, because I know many Saudi couples, and very few of the Saudi men ask their wives permission. And she said that Osama came to her and told her that he was considering this, but he would never do it if she did not agree for him to do it. And it was a very long process. It was a number of months with them talking back and forth, and finally she came to him and said, it's okay, I agree. And then for the third wife, which was the second Saudi wife after Najwa was Syrian, of course, and then the next two were Saudi, he asked Najwa to find someone for him to marry, and she met this woman that she really liked a lot, and they became as close as two sisters. And Najwa said she loved every minute of that woman being in the household.
Now, it's interesting, you describe in the book, of course, in Saudi culture and also in parts of the Muslim world, how the women very much buy into the lifestyle and into the, you know, what their husbands dictate. It's interesting in the book where you write about Osama bin Laden's drive, you know, how he was determined to go through jihad. And I want to quote from the book when you talked about how if Osama bin Laden had been kicked out of Pakistan, he'd have gone to Afghanistan. If he was kicked out of Afghanistan, he'd gone to Yemen. And you write in the book, if Yemen, and this is from Omar, if Yemen threw him out, he would journey to the middle of the most hostile desert where he would plot against the West. Violent jihad was my father's life. Nothing else really mattered. Nothing. How much do you think his family bought into the concept of jihad and his sort of campaigns against the West and its allies?
By his family, do you mean like his wife and children?
Initially, yeah, the direct family, wife and kids. I mean, initially when he started going through that, and you described the changes he went through when he started to get angry at the West and so on, how much do you think they bought into it at the time?
Well, I don't think that he discussed very much of his work outside the home with his wives, so I don't believe that that was a real point of interest with Najwa and the other wives. However, with Omar, when he was a child, we have to remember that everyone around his father loved him, called him the prince, even asked permission to speak. So Omar growing up believing that everyone in the world loved his father, who was a highly respected figure. But once Omar became a teenager and he started observing more, and once the attempt was made on Osama's life and the boys in school, all of them were in danger of being killed, all of Osama's sons. Once that happened and Omar started getting older and able to think through things, he saw that the part of his father's life for violent jihad he did not agree with, and Omar was the only person around his father who ever raised his voice, disagreed with his father. His father was surrounded by very tough fighters who agreed with every single thing he did. But here's this young boy, which I find that so courageous, when he disagreed with violence and did not like the way it was going, he would raise this with his father, and I think Osama was a little bit shocked by Omar's behavior, actually.
We've got a caller on the line from the United Kingdom. Shaukat is with us. Good to have you back, Shaukat. What would you like to ask?
Yes, thank you very much, Riz. I'd like to ask, does Osama bin Laden's family believe that he is guilty of the atrocities caused in 9/11? Thank you.
Okay, it was Shocker?
Shaukat, yeah.
Well, I have to say that in the beginning, when 9/11 first happened, as it was conveyed to me, Omar could not believe that his father was responsible. He just felt like it was something his father couldn't have done. He felt it was a really big act. There were a lot of things he felt it was like the sort of activity that government against a government would occur. And perhaps, too, there's that son's desire for his father not to be guilty of this. But once Osama came out and took responsibility for it, then it was difficult. Omar knew at that time that obviously it was something his father did. But you know, I don't put much blame on Omar for this, because to tell you the truth, so many of my friends in the Middle East still to this day do not believe that Osama was behind 9/11, that it was the CIA or the U.S. government or Mossad or someone else. So it's not that uncommon, but yes, Omar does now know that his father planned 9/11. Najwa, she was completely unaware of everything, and she does not discuss these issues.
Let me quickly get in an email that we got through Facebook from Moin Raouf, who wrote in, and we've touched on this a bit here, but did Osama bin Laden ever admit responsibility for the US embassy bombings in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam? And what about 9/11, he says as well. But in particular, I mean, you say he didn't talk much to the family about what happened. What about those embassy bombings?
Well, the embassy bombings, I believe one of the most interesting stories in the entire book is when Omar, he was old enough to really know what was going on. He got up the morning, the day of the embassy bombings, he went to see his father, to see what was going on, and his father said, we're all leaving. And all the men left and left the women in Kandahar, the women and children, and they went to Klas, which was a camp, a training camp. And they were there for a number of hours, stayed there, everyone's talking. Actually, they were there for a longer period of time than that. And then a couple of days later, he received a phone call, the father, and they left and they went to Kabul. They went to northern Afghanistan, and Omar describes the trip, which I found just really compelling. And they went to a safe house, and within a couple of hours of leaving the training camp and being at the safe house, that's when Clinton sent the cruise missiles. And before, everyone had been celebrating, Omar said, about the attacks in Africa. But once they received word that a lot of the training camps had been destroyed in Afghanistan, he said his father became extremely emotional, was screaming and saying who would want to kill a Muslim, and very, very upset. So that, for me, of all the stories in the book, I found that one really one of the most intriguing.
Jean, I'm going to ask you to stay put. We've got to take a very short break here, but we'll be back with more of this discussion in a moment. Don't go away.